Okay, sure.
I will present shortly our guest that today is Naunin, and we will complete our training in Echinococcus family. We started with Multilocularis, then with Gael we explore on Granulosus, and now we go to the family tree. That means that we will see with molecular biology how we can explore the biology of also of the parasite, and mostly we can understand where we come from and where probably we get. And for this, we have as host Naunin Mahmood, which is a researcher and a lecturer in Pakistan. And we collaborate since some months, but it was a very interesting collaboration. She works on molecular biology and phylogenesis, and we match this with our skills in epidemiology and diagnostic. Therefore, it's a good thing we have already started publishing together, and I think that she is a nice person and also have some skills to introduce you and particularly students of biotechnology to how we can use these technologies to make research and also to make also sometimes diagnosis. And that's it. I don't want to take more time to Naunin. And welcome, Naunin. And if you have questions, you can write down and then ask to her. And many thanks for accepting my invitation. And thank you again.
Okay, thank you so much for this nice introduction. And I'm really thankful to you for providing me this opportunity that I've been given a chance by you to interact with your students. And it was really a delightful experience to work with you. And you have been very kind to me. And if you kindly allow, then I can share my screen.
You can do.
And we can start. Okay, thank you. We can start the lecture. Okay, Professor Antonio asked me to basically talk about the molecular aspects of cystic echinococcus. So I have prepared my presentation according to that. And first of all, this is a brief introduction about what the cystic echinococcus is. I think most of you from belonging to the professor's lab already know what this disease is. And this is a zoonotic disease, means it can be transmitted from animals to humans, though humans are the accidental hosts, but still this disease is prevalent in many areas, especially as I'm from Pakistan, and I can tell you that it's endemic over here, just like your Sardinia. This disease is quite prevalent over here, but unfortunately, we don't have advanced tools and skills to basically diagnose this disease, even though we don't use ultrasound methods and things like that to basically check or diagnose. So in Pakistan, we are lagging quite behind. But when I was doing my studies on the echinococcus, I found out that it's highly prevalent in Pakistan as well. So, and amongst that, Echinococcus granulosus sensu stricto, which we know as genotypes G1 and G3, are really very prevalent, just like the other areas of Pakistan. Other areas of the globe. Okay, so its life cycle involves the domestic animals, in which the dog is the definitive host, whereas the domestic ungulates are the intermediate host for this parasite. This is a short life cycle. I think you're aware of that. I just added it for your information. But anyhow, if you want more information in it, I can describe it. Okay. Now, moving on to the basically what the Echinococcus granulosus is and how have we understood the interspecific variations within this genus, was based initially on few morphological and biological aspects, but still, when scientists were working on this disease and they saw that few cysts form inside the livers or the lungs of certain animals and within humans, they were morphologically indistinguishable. So when they tried to explore the life cycle of this, they then found out that this disease or this tapeworm, basically Echinococcus, it infects two hosts. So one of it is, as you know, as dogs, and the adult stage of this tapeworm is basically harbored within the dog's intestines. So when they saw that, they basically provided certain different kinds of the species, and there were certain taxonomic differences which existed between the species within the genus Echinococcus. But anyhow, this taxonomy of Echinococcus has been quite controversial, because at one stage, one scientist used to prove that this is a separate species forming the polycystic or alveolar echinococcus, and the other one said no, these are the same species which form the both polycystic or alveolar or the single the cystic echinococcus. So finally, when it was found out that echinococcus, cystic echinococcus is basically caused by the Echinococcus granulosus, whereas the alveolar echinococcus is caused by the Echinococcus multilocularis. So then it was finally agreed that there are two species, but still scientists saw that certain types of the cystic echinococcus, they infected particular kinds of the hosts, even though they had dog as their common definitive host, but there were multiple variety of the intermediate hosts for this Echinococcus granulosus. And these species, or these strains, which we call them now as strains based on the molecular data, these were basically morphologically indistinguishable at that time. And finally, the studies from the from the horse isolate and the sheep isolate, they basically characterized or opened the debate for the presence of the strains or variants within the Echinococcus granulosus. So that is why, it is basically considered of now 10 strains. That is why we define it as Echinococcus granulosus sensulato. That is, in general terms, it contains 10 strains, that is from G1 to G10. So as you can see within this, that overall, if we check the cystic Echinococcus sensulato, it comprises of these 5 species, or you may also call them as 5 strains. Still, taxonomic uncertainties are there, and we do have certain problems in identifying this group, which is G6 to G10. Anyhow, this is the sheep strain, which is comprised of the 2 strains G1 and G3 complex, and we now call it as Echinococcus granulosus sensu stricto, or EGSS. Okay, previously, when the initial studies came on the strain descriptions, there was another strain which was included in this G1, G3 complex, which was called as G2 strain. But as I will show you later on, that G2 and G3 were quite similar. That is why now they're considered as the same strain. So G1, G3 complex has excluded the G2, which was previously described as Tasmanian strain. Okay, next is the horse strain. Basically, these first 4 species are based on, or their names, the strain names are based on the types of the intermediate host they infect. So G4 is the horse strain because it was identified, because horse is the intermediate host and it was identified from the horses, and it is E. equinus. Whereas G5 is called as cattle strain, which is E. ortlepi, because it infects cattle as its intermediate host. Okay, the next group is G6 to G10. Okay, initially there were like 5 strains within this: G6, G7, G8, G9, and G10. But now G9 is not considered as a valid strain, so that is why it's excluded from this group. And now we have G6, which is called as camel strain, G7, which is called as pig strain, whereas G8 and G10, because both of them use cervids as the intermediate host, so they are called as cervid strains. Okay, the next one is the E. felidus. It was basically identified from a lion, and lion is basically its definitive host, not the intermediate host. Rather now, according to Nakao et al. 2013, I was just reading that warthogs are basically the intermediate host, but initially there was no information about the intermediate host of the E. pallidus. That is why its name is based on its definitive host. So these are the 5 species or the 5 strains, you may say, which are comprised or present within the E. granulosus sensu-lato. Okay, otherwise, if we now compare this biological features of the E. granulosus sensu-lato, they also vary in their host specificity, biochemistry, zoonotic potential, geographical distribution, even though at some places these strains occur in sympatry, but still there are distinct geographical prevalences of these strains, and these also differ on few developmental patterns and infectivity of the host. And this variation is very important for us. And now what we do is we combine the molecular data with that of these biological and epidemiological differences, and then we describe or taxonomically describe a certain strain. Okay, this is the global distribution of these strains, and we can see overhead that this strain description is basically based on the mitochondrial DNA. And this study was basically led by a very important Echinococcus specialist, that was McManus. He's from Australia, and he led this study based on the mitochondrial DNA. And now this figure is taken from Ito et al. 2016, which describes the presence or the global distribution of these strains. The most common or the cosmopolitan strain is this G1 to G3, which basically is called as sheep strain because it is widely present among the sheep, whereas other domestic ungulates like goats, even pigs, we have just identified from Sardinia that pigs also harbor G3 strain. Then you can see cattle. They also, and buffaloes, they also have this G1 and G3 strain within them. So it has the ability to infect wide variety of the intermediate host, and it has the cosmopolitan distribution. Okay, then you can see the black dot represents the G5 strain. G5 strain has also been identified from Pakistan as well as India, Africa, European sides, and even from South America and Central America. Then you can see this as G10. So this is basically the global distribution of these strains, and amongst which the most important from the point of view of the zoonotic potentials are G1 and G3 strains, and then G6 strains, G6 and G7, or you may say that Echinococcus canadensis group, because both G1, G3, and G6 and G7 have the potential to infect humans. And in fact, G6 is ranked at the second number of in terms of its infectivity to humans. So these two strains are very, very important from this point of view, that if we want to control the cystic echinococcosis in humans and we want to limit its spread, we have to basically focus on Echinococcus granulosus sensu stricto, that is G1 and G3 genotypes. And we also have to focus on G6 and G7 genotypes. Okay, this I basically tried to put up a small historical perspective of molecular tools which were being used or which were used to finally lead us to the current taxonomy of Echinococcus granulosus. So as I was reading the history, and there were multiple revisions and multiple phases through which one scientist was describing that this should be described as a species, whereas other evidence came later on and they said, no, it should not be described as a species. So many species within the Echinococcus have been described, and many have been invalidated during this course of time. And whereas our current understanding is basically based on the application of the molecular tools along with the epidemiological and biological parameters, which have led to the current strain description that I have just told you. And it is important that I should tell you that even now scientists are leading towards a new taxonomic proposition about G6 and G7, and they are now naming that camel and pig strain as E. intermedius, whereas G8 and G10 are being given the name of E. canadensis. However, we are in hope of getting more data and more things to just validate this stance. So let's see what we would get in the coming times. Anyhow, so the application of the molecular tools have helped us in characterization of the isolates of Echinococcus, and it has also quite provided us insight into the population genetics. And now we know that what could be the possible historical scenario through which genus Echinococcus would have multiplied, and how the history of the domestication of these sheep and buffaloes could have led to the introduction of the parasites in different areas or different parts of the world. Secondly, the epidemiology and taxonomy of the parasite has been clearly understood to a very large extent on the basis of the molecular data that we have. And as you know, we use both mitochondrial and nuclear evidences to formulate our final conclusions. And then we compare that data with the biological perspectives of that particular strain. And then we finally arrive to certain conclusions. Okay, then this molecular analysis has also led us on to understanding the genetic basis of the phenotypic variation between these strains. Okay, so if I'm going to start the history, a small perspective on the history. Basically, initially the genomic material from the sheep strain or from the sheep or hydatid cyst that is formed within the sheep and from that of the horse, it was taken and RFLP analysis was done for these both strains. Okay, before that, few scientists, they started certain experiments and they saw that media in which the sheep derived isolate grew or the sheep tapeworm grew, the horse tapeworm didn't, or it couldn't preferably take up on those materials or those media, and it couldn't proceed on to its further developmental stages, the adult tapeworm. So this basically led to this thing that there may have been certain differences within the host preferences with by these tapeworms. So that you may say the evidence was basically then validated by this RFLP analysis, which then told that basically the horse strain and the sheep strain were in fact two different strains, and those were being caused by two different kinds of the tapeworms. Then, okay, DNA hybridization studies along with this RFLP analysis was done for the sheep and dog strain, because initial experiments are always not very good, and we say that we should not arrive to conclusion on the basis of a single experiment. So further studies were done, and on the basis of those studies, which included RFLP and then DNA hybridization through certain blotting analysis, it was seen that DNA hybridization pattern for the sheep and dog strain, it was similar to that of the bovine material, which originated from United Kingdom, Kenya, Spain, and India, which indicated the cosmopolitan distribution of this strain. And in fact, this observation is now validated that sheep strain is in fact distributed around the whole world, and we can find, or we do find it from everywhere or every part of the world. Okay, then the DNA hybridization analysis was done for the cattle isolates from the Holland, which indicated that that hybridization profile for the cattle isolates was different from that of the profile of the isolates which were derived from the sheep. So it again indicated that there is certain difference which existed at the genetic level between these two isolates. That is why they were giving the different DNA hybridization profiles. Likewise, the studies on the isolates from the goats, it indicated that goats could harbor two different strains of the Echinococcus granulosus. One was that of the sheepdog strain, and the other form was one which infected camels. So in fact, this is what we know today, that goats are basically prone to infection by both G1 and G3 genotypes and G6 genotype. Okay, then the study was proceeded on to the pig isolates, in which it was seen that the DNA hybridization profile for pig isolates was also different, but it was quite similar to the genetically to the forms of the E. granulosus, which used camel and goats as the intermediate host. And I will just show you the phylogenetic trees, in which you would also see that G6 and G7 are in fact quite close to each other. And this is what the DNA hybridization profiles also told us. Okay, so on the basis of this initial observation, which was basically led on by McManus, the PCR-based technique was finally formulated, in which we finally led to this conclusion that there are certain intraspecific variants which were present within the genus Echinococcus, and on these studies were on the mitochondrial genes and as well as on the nuclear genes, because there is slight variation between the sequences between the mitochondria and that of the nuclear genome. You know, mitochondrial genome is basically just taken from the mother's side, whereas both paternal and maternal genomes are present within the nuclear gene. So nuclear genes and mitochondrial genes differ very slightly on few patterns, which I would also tell you in the phylogenetic tree in the coming slides. Okay. So there were two mitochondrial genes. The fragments, these were the partial mitochondrial genes. The fragments of those were basically used to amplify. The one is COX-1 and other one is NAD1. Okay, I've just put a star and I would read this line. The two very similar variants detected in the COI study or the COX-1 study could not be separated from one another using the NAD1 data. So you can see that even different genes from the same genome also differ in their resolution or in their sequences, and because few of the genes are conserved, few of them are prone to mutations and they have high differences between them. So this is what I would show you in the alignment. And this is what we have seen. Even that NAD1 gene is not very good in resolving these differences between the strains, whereas CO1 gene or the COX-1 gene, that is very good in describing the differences at the strain level and even at very smaller level. Whereas these were the fragments in which COX-1 fragment was just based on 366 base pairs, whereas and NAD1 fragment was only based on 471 base pairs. Okay, then they basically started another study which was based on the nuclear genome, and it was intertranscribed spacer 1 for the ribosomal DNA, and it was the complete segment they took. And on the basis of that, what they concluded was that basically Echinococcus sensulato or Echinococcus granulosus sensulato is basically a paraphyletic group. Means that not all of the descendants of this genus were known at that time. But now what is the accepted version among the different scientists is that no, it is not a paraphyletic group, it is rather a monophyletic group in which all of the descendants of the Echinococcus genus are currently defined and they have been taxonomically described. Okay, so on the basis of these three initial studies, what was finally concluded that there are certain different evolutionarily diverse groups within the Echinococcus granulosus. So one was that sheep strain group, other one was bovine strain group, and then there was a horse strain group. Okay, this is basically a small picture of the data set for the partial COX-1 gene or CO1 gene, which was used by the Bowles and McManus group. Here you can see this is G1, G3, G4, G5, G6, and G7. Okay, this I've checked it to alignment. Now you can see that, say for example, at this third position, because this is the first nucleotide, this is the second one, and this is the third nucleotide. At third position of this COX-1 partial segment, which was used to basically amplify this portion of the gene, there is same nucleotide which is present in all these strains, whereas in G7, there is a difference of this single nucleotide at third position, which shows that there is a point mutation or there is a difference of a single nucleotide at position number 3 for this 366 base pairs group data set between the G7 and all other strains. Okay, now if we proceed, you would see that G4 and G5, they now differ on the 6th position from all other strains. Likewise, if we move further, like we can see that G1 and G3 are similar, whereas G4 is also similar at this point, whereas G5, G6, and G7 are different. So these color variations basically point towards the differences in the nucleotides at the same position, and you would be seeing that within this small diagram that I have taken, G1 and G3 are almost similar. That is why they're still grouped together within a single species, which is called as Echinococcus granulosus sensu stricto. Whereas you would see that even G6 and G7 are also quite close together. However, there are certain fixed differences within the genome which are present for these strains. I would just show you after this completion of this presentation. Okay. So if I talk about G1 and G3 only differed on the 2 points at within this 366 base pair region. The points were position number 66 for the nucleotide and the 257, whereas the differences between Echinococcus granulosus sensu stricto and other genotypes was quite large, and I couldn't put up all those. Okay. Now, the important thing is this, I was telling you about that mitochondrial phylogenies and nuclear phylogenies or the nuclear DNA provides a slightly different stance, and whereas the mitochondrial DNA provides us a slightly different resolution for the genome which comes from the same species. So in fact, there are certain studies have pointed out that the nuclear data that is being employed, it does not describe the differences between G1 and G3. Important thing is this, that at mitochondrial level, the strains G1 and G3, the sheep strain and the buffalo strain, they differ a lot, right? There are certain points, there are fixed points in which you see that if you pick up every G3 isolate, it would differ from the G1 always at that specific point within the mitochondrial genome. But if we check the nuclear data, the G3 strain does not vary much from the G1 strain, and that is why they're still grouped together. But it's important to tell you that within Pakistan and India, we have slightly quite high prevalence of the G3 strain compared to G1 strain. Otherwise, the percentage that you find globally is that usually 90 to 95% isolates are basically from the G1 genotype, whereas only just 3% or 4% are from the G3, or even rather in certain areas like Iran, China, or from the other European countries, not the Italy. The percentage or the frequency of finding the G1 or sheep strain is nearly 99% or 98%. Even from Africa, this same pattern is observed. But within India and Pakistan, what we have seen is that nearly 66% or more than 50%, or recently what I've seen is rather 70% of the isolates are of the G3 genotype. And it is quite striking thing and quite different thing, and which definitely calls for further details, further detailed study, and definitely it's a question that needs to be answered, that why G3 strain is unusually high number within India and Pakistan. One of its reasons is that it employs buffaloes as its intermediate hosts, and there is quite high population of buffalo within Pakistan and India. But still, this is a thing which is to be explored, and we would definitely look for finding out answers to this important question. Okay, so recently, a group from Estonia, they worked on the complete mitochondrial genomes between G1 and G3, and they said that G1 and G3 do not vary much at the nuclear level, whereas at mitochondrial level, they do exhibit certain differences which are present. And that is why scientists still say that these should not be separated as different strains and they should be termed as a single species. Okay, so the important thing is this, that the construction of the phylogenetic trees, when we only consider the mitochondrial DNA data, it involves the risk of misunderstanding the evolutionary history, since maternally inherited mitochondrial DNA does not necessarily match the true history of the species. So that is why whenever we are going to formulate the phylogenies, or we are going to understand the evolutionary relationships or the evolutionary history of a certain species, we definitely have to take into account the molecular data, the nuclear data with the mitochondrial data. So the current our observation is, or the current conclusion based on the different mitochondrial and nuclear studies, is that Gynococcus is in fact a monophyletic group which encompasses all of its descendant lineages, contrary to the old point of view, which was basically based on the fact that it is a paraphyletic group and we do not know about all of its descendant lineages. Okay, these are the two trees which are phylogenetic trees, which are based on, the left one, A, is based on the mitochondrial DNA, and the B portion is based on the nuclear phylogeny. Okay, so these are the bootstrap values. If these values are above 50, it tells us that this branch of the tree is quite fine and valid, and we can base our conclusion on the basis of this pattern that we can observe over here. But otherwise, if this value is below 50, then we are in doubt that we do not have complete data with us and we have to incorporate more things within this data to validate our studies. So you can see that here the figure is below 50, so it is somewhat ambiguous and we need to get into more details of it and we have to explore it more. Okay, and this is here you can see is the rate of substitution. That is, there are certain sites within the genome which are prone to mutations, and this branch length basically it tells us about the rate of the substitutions, which is based on this 0.1 nucleotide substitutions per branch, whereas on this nuclear side, it tells us that there are 0.01 substitutions on this side. And, nuclear genome is more conserved and highly conserved, and, it also deletes all its errors within it, and it tries that all of its portions remain conserved because, essential genes are present within the nuclear genome. Anyway, within the mitochondrial genome, there are also highly conserved portions, and but mitochondrial genome, it also provides the basis for the initial description of these things. Okay, so this is a branch. This is whole is a phylogenetic tree. Okay, and this is a branch of the tree, and this is the point at which a common ancestor could be present, which have then diverged into these descendant lineages. Okay, now you can see that I hope you know about the other species of the genus Echinococcus. One is Echinococcus shikrucus, which was identified from Tibetan plateau. This is Echinococcus multilocularis. And these are the new tropical species, Echinococcus vogeli and Oligarthra. Okay, species which is present at the base of the trees basically called as basal taxon, whereas the other species are then the descendant or the derived lineages. This is the branch point at which the two branches separate. And if the species are arranged like this at a certain branch, these are considered as the sister groups or the sister taxons. Sister groups or the sister taxons means that they do not vary much, and this branch length, it indicates the, you may say, the rate of the difference or the rate of the differences between different strains. Okay, so from this point of view, there is a very important observation which was shown from both nuclear and the mitochondrial genomes, was that Echinococcus granulosus, sensu stricto, and Echinococcus pallidus, which was basically identified from Africa. These are sister species or the sister taxons, meaning they have their genomes which is quite similar to each other. This is based on the mitochondrial phylogeny. And now you can see here, there is slight difference on this thing that the length of the branch it represents, that there is more difference within this genome of the Echinococcus granulosus compared to this E. pallidus. But as they are falling on the same branch point, it also tells us that these are the sister taxa. Okay. Then is that Echinococcus triquicus and Multilocularis. They are also the sister taxa based on the mitochondrial DNA phylogeny. Likewise, you can see that here it is also the similar observation, but the degree of the divergence it differs a bit, because here you can see there is more divergence compared to the nuclear side, which shows that there is less divergence. Okay. Then other one is E. ottlepi and E. canadensis. So now you can see that they're emerging from the same branch in E. ottlepi and E. canadensis group. It also shares the similarity, and they also have a sister taxa relationship between them. Likewise, same pattern is observed within the nuclear phylogeny. Okay. Next one is that E. oligarcta is sister to all members of the genus Echinococcus, means that I told you it is present at the base. So means that it is sister taxa to all these members of the genus Echinococcus, and same thing you can observe over here within the nuclear phylogeny. Okay, then is that E. equinus forms the clade with E. shaquicus, E. multilocularis, and E. ottlepi with the E. canadensis that you can see over here. That a clade is being formed within E. shaquicus, E. multilocularis, and here you can see E. ottlepi and E. canadensis, they're also sharing the clade. Likewise, you can see the mitochondrial phylogeny is also exhibiting the same pattern. Okay, and the last observation was that E. canadensis genotypes G6 to G8 and G10 are closely related to each other. And in fact, it is being displayed within both nuclear genome and mitochondrial phylogenies. So you can see that still G6 and G7, these are similar, and G10 and G8 are more close to each other. Likewise, at this side, you can see that G6 and G7 are more close because there is a branch which is emerging at this point and is leading to the two species or two strains over here, G6 and G7. Whereas the branch which is present at posterior side with E. ottlepi, that is basically connected with E. canadensis G8 genotype. Okay, so this is the way we understand the phylogenies. The normal or usual method is to basically go for the maximum likelihood trees or the neighbor joining trees, through which we make up these phylogenies. We provide the nuclear or the sequence data that we have, and then we finally compute these phylogenies based on the mitochondrial genome and the nuclear genome. And this is the picture or description which I have taken from the paper by Nakao et al. 2013, where is another paper by Knapp et al. 2011. It displays more striking differences between nuclear and mitochondrial phylogenies. So the point that I want to make over here is that that mitochondrial DNA, when we study that, it shows more divergence, because you can see that there is a longer branch for even for Multilocularis and Trichococcus at this mitochondrial site, whereas this branch is shorter. So the longer the branch is, it would show that there is a higher number of mutations within, or there is higher divergence within this genome or within these sequences. Now you can see here for E. ottlepi, what is this? This is a very small branch length. But here for the mitochondrial side, you can see the branch length is quite longer. Likewise, you can see the differences between other species as well. Anyhow, but for initial description and for the preliminary data, it is good that you only employ the mitochondrial genome for the studies, because it yields the information for the strain description or for the genotypes that are prevalent in certain area. Like say, for example, we have symmetric occurrence of G1 strain and G6 strains at certain sites. And usually I was reading that unless we go for the surgeries, we do not know that whether this metacystode is formed by G1 or G6, even though the developmental differences exist for the tapeworm, but not for the metacystodes. So unless we study through or analyze that metacystode through the mitochondrial genome or PCR, we cannot get this information whether this hydatid cyst is formed by G1 or the G6. So scientists are still trying that how can we manage that even through pre-surgical processes. We can understand the differences between the strains, that which strain is more prevalent at certain site and which strain is causing this disease. Moreover, the scientists are also working on the development of vaccines because E95 vaccines, which is commonly used for controlling the cystic echinococosis, that has lost its meaning for other strains. It is only good for G1 strain, and whereas you cannot control the other strains on the basis of this vaccine, because each strain differs at its genomic level. So a vaccine which is based specifically for that particular kind of strain, that has to be employed if you want to control this disease to the whole world. And unfortunately, we are still not successful in devising those strain-specific vaccines to control cystic echinococosis. That is why the disease is still prevalent. And even there are certain strains for which we are yet not fully aware of the other intermediate host that they employ, and the studies and the research is still going on. And one of the paper by Sajjadi from Iran, it describes the G6 genotype. It specifically has the affinity for the human brain to develop the metacystode within the human brain. So this side of the preferences or organ predilection is also being sought and also being explored. So there are multiple dynamic sides to what we can explore within this disease and what we can see further to control this disease of cystic echinococosis, which has basically causing or inflicting economic losses for not only for our livestock, but also for human beings. And most of the people just go on, they don't know that they have the metacystodes within them. I think you are all aware of this fact that most of these are benign, and usually when they expand in size, then we understand that this is some kind of tumor or a cyst which is present within a human, or it has been infected by this tapeworm. Okay, so this was a small introduction about this molecular aspect of cystic echinococosis. And Dr. Antonio asked me to just also show you certain short tutorial on how do you identify the sequences, how do you see whether a sequence is right or a sequence is good, and how do you find that your sequence it belongs to which species, how do you explore certain databases which are available on internet. So there is a short tutorial for you for that. And okay, before going for that, if you have any question, you can please ask me. I'm open to the questions.
Any question regarding this part? Okay, I think you was very deep in, and we can go to the tutorial part.
Okay, right. Okay.